Okie dokie. All right. We started with attendance, obviously. We're going to talk about certain ways of organizing. It depends on the topic that you have selected. You might have a way of organizing that works better in some ways and not in other ways. Some points on main points, just some things to remember when you're incorporating your main points into your speech. Supporting material, we're going to have a chapter where we talk about this later. I say specifically what day we talk about it, but connectives. These are really important because they indicate to your audience what point you're on, what point you just talked about, what point you're going on to next. There's 4 different types of connectives you can use. We'll have some discussion questions. And then I'll tell you what days you're going to be speaking for your narrative speeches. So very important that you pay attention to when I tell you what day you're going to be speaking on. And then we'll talk about next class, which is on Tuesday of next week. So why do we have to organize? Because somebody can't just come up here and start rambling. It just doesn't make any sense. You're going to get lost. So some techniques are designed to inform. Other techniques are a little bit like persuasive techniques. You might need to sort of say, here's the problem, here's the solution for the problem. Main points. Developed in the body of your speech. You're going to give a preview in the introduction. You're going to give a wrap up in the conclusion. But you want to make sure that you develop them in your speech in a way that makes sense. Most speeches have between 2 and 5. You need at least 2. You can't have just one main point. So the first type of order you can do is chronological. It follows a time pattern. So right here, I got a picture of the Colosseum. So if you were talking about the Colosseum, you might first start by saying, or if you were to talk about esports, it began in the 1980s. So that's the genesis of esports, friendly competition among friends. Then we get into the 90s. So we can see we're going in chronological order. It became a global phenomenon. It began to flourish in the 2000s. And now it draws more people today. So now we went from here's the beginning, later, even later, and now today. So that's one way you can order it is chronologically, In my life, here's how you can do it for your personal narrative. In my life, here's where I was before college, here's where I am now, here's where I want to be. Very basic way you can sort of break it down. Spatial order. It goes in a directional pattern. This one actually does matter. So here I have a hurricane. You would start at the center of the hurricane. And then you go to a little bit further out in the hurricane. So you'd say outside the eye is the dense ring of clouds. Then after the eye wall, you move on to the large bands of clouds, precipitation, spiral rain bands. So you can see it sort of goes in order in a way that makes sense for here's the densest part and it goes out. Causal, cause and effect, It faces a growing shortage of trained nurses in parts of the country. So that's the problem, or that's the cause. The effect of that is it will affect the healthcare system. So that's causal. Problem solution. This is where you're going to get into persuasive. Here's the problem, here's a solution. Pretty basic stuff. And you can't have a third main point after that if you wanted to, so what can we do or something? So not just here's the solution, but here's how we can enact that solution if you wanted to take things a bit further. Problem solution order main points. Puppy mills are a serious problem. Solving it requires legislation and individual initiatives. So in your second main point, you would say, here's some legislation and here's some individual things we can do. So you could break that main point down as saying subpoint A, subpoint B, but don't worry too much about organizing right now. We'll talk about that in a future lecture. Topical. It's just subtopics that make sense in whatever order that might be in. So Josephine Baker, as an entertainer, you talk about her as an entertainer. The next thing you would do, as a spy. So she wasn't just this, she was also that. And then you talk about everything that has to do with her being a spy. It wouldn't make sense to bring up espionage in point number 1. Because she was a spy, you would put that in point number 2. And then the final thing, as a civil rights activist. So you can say my speech is about, just in very broad terms, you'd say this speech is about Josephine Baker. In this speech, I'm going to talk about her as an entertainer, as a spy, and as a civil rights activist. And then you go into your connective. You would say, let's move, and we're going to begin by talking about her as an entertainer. That's your transition into your first main point. But keep your points separate. You don't want to conflate them because that confuses the audience. If you start talking about things that don't belong in certain places, people don't really understand. Try for the same pattern of wording. So like if you use active tense, you know what active tense is? So like a passive tense would be like, Joe jumped over the fence. Active tense is Joe jumps over the fence. So you wouldn't want to say he jumped and then he jumps. Keep it all in the same tense, whether that's past, whether that's present, whatever. And balance time devoted to each. Your textbook talks about this, where you don't want to spend half of your speech on one of your main points. You want to sort of spread it out to where it makes sense. They give a breakdown of saying 20% for this, 20% for that. I would recommend you put 25% of your time for the intro, 25% for the conclusion, 50% for the body. And I think that's pretty sensible, but it's whatever works for you. Now, supporting materials. It's just how do you support your main points? Because main points by themselves don't mean anything. It's just an assertion. You're saying Josephine Baker was a spy. What supporting material can you give for that? To say, to support this information, she was a spy in this place, here's what she did. And you can find examples of supporting material on pages 164, 166 of your textbook. So chapter 8 is also talks about it a little more in depth. And we'll be covering chapter 8 on February 29th. So in about like a month. All right. We're now entering to the most important part of the lecture, connectives. So this is where you have to pay attention. You connect ideas. You're saying, here's main point 1, here's main point 2. In between the main points is where a connective goes, or before a main point. So here are the types of connectives. Number 1, a transition. Number 2, an internal preview, an internal summary, and a signpost. So let's begin by talking about transitions. See what I did there? It indicates you're finished one thought and you're moving to another. Pretty basic stuff. An example of that would be, so far I've spoken about Cesar Chavez, the community organizer, but it was his work as a labor leader that etched his name into American society. So it's to say, we're not talking about him as a community organizer anymore. We're moving on to his work as a labor leader. Anybody know about Cesar Chavez? He taught a bunch of He taught a bunch of illiterate farmers how to write and how to read so that they could go vote. Because the problem back in the day was you had to pass a literacy test to be able to vote. And if you can't read, it's kind of hard to pass a literacy test. So what did he do? He helped a bunch of farmers, like 900 different farmers, on how to read and write. So really cool guy. That's transitions. Let's move on talking about internal previews. It's in the body of your speech, all right? So it's indicating what you will be discussing next. So it's not necessarily a summary of what you just talked about. It's a preview of what's about to happen. An example, in discussing how Asian Americans have been stereotyped in the mass media, we'll look first at the origins of the problem and second at its continuing impact today. So we're not saying anything about the previous main point. We're just saying we're moving on to the next main point, and in that next main point, here are the things we're going to talk about. All right? That's a preview. How does that differ from a summary? It's just the inverse. You're talking about the preceding point. You're not talking about the next point anymore. In short, palm reading is an ancient art developed in China more than 5,000 years ago. Practice in ancient Greece and Rome flourished during the medieval ages, survived the Industrial Revolution, and remains popular in many parts of the world. So in this main point might be the history of palm reading. And then this is how you would give a summary of that main point by saying, this is what we talked about in this main point. So the final thing is a signpost. Very similar to a transition. The first thing we talked about, where are we focusing our attention? So it goes a little bit further. Instead of saying that, it's saying the first cause is inefficient production. The second is a recurring drought. The final cause is mismanagement of available food resources. I would say this is probably good to put in the end of your speech. Like, here's all the points we talked about. But in your conclusion, you can also say your recap. And we'll talk about that on Tuesday. We'll talk about introductions and conclusions. But Are there any questions about the different types of connectives? Because those are the glue that holds your speech together. All right. Because, like I said, your audience doesn't have an outline. They just have to listen. That's why it's so important for you to say, we're done with this, we're moving on. So, finally, discussion questions. Number one, can we use questions as signposts? Yes or no? What? No? Essentially, yes. You can use a question as a signpost and say, so how is this problem affecting America today? And then you move on to the next main point. So you can, it's not like you can't, it's just you have to find out what's the most effective thing for you. You know, now that we know the problem, how can we move on to solving it? So you are allowed to use questions as signposts. This is a question that you don't have to answer today. I just want you to put it in your mind. What type of organizing are you going to do for your personal narrative? Is it going to be chronological? Is it going to be topical? Like, you know, when I was a teenager, I did this. You might think that's chronological, but that could be more topical by saying, I'm going to tell you about the 3 different jobs I had, you know? Number 1 is this, number 2 is this, number 3 is this. So that'd be more topical. You shouldn't have to use a problem solution for your narrative because it's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me. We're not Taylor Swift in here, all right? Even though that is a bot. Okay, now, this is also very important stuff. Write this date down if your name is on the board right now, because this is the day you're giving your personal narrative speech, February 15th. Here's how I did this. I took everybody's name, and on the class roster, you have a number. That's why there's a number right there. It's just according to your last name. I take those numbers, put them in a random number generator, and it spit this out in this order. The next order is that. So on day 1, Thursday, February 15th, we'll have Abby, Emily Taylor, Lacey, Aiden, Haley, Julia, and Jazz, or Jade, sorry. Then Tuesday, February 20th, day 2, we got Lily, Stephanie, Armin, Emily Ashcraft, Michael, Maddie, Giselle. There really should be no reason you can't come on both days. All right. So I didn't select any of this. I didn't like pick anybody out and say, here's who I think needs 5 days more time to prepare. I didn't do that. It is completely random. And this is not the speaking order necessarily. Like Abby doesn't have to go first on this day. It could be like, hey, Emily really wants to go first. She'll go first. I'm not putting words in your mouth, Emily. I'm just saying. Yeah, totally. So you just have to make sure, I might have you come up on the board and write your name up here in whatever order. Like if you wanted to go first, put your name at the top. And if you want to go last, put your name at the bottom. You know, so you can sort of figure out whatever works for you. You just have to speak on that day. Doesn't really matter the order, because I know it can be agonizing if you just want to get, you know, if you don't want to sit there and be last, you can be like, hey, can I go first? And that'll be fine. But as long as you go, that is really all that matters. My microphone has been changed. Oh no. All right. Are there any questions about what days we're going? Does anybody not know what day they're going? Okay. And then Aiden's going on Thursday, February 15th. Somebody can tell him, or he can watch this recording and then he can find out that way. So I will make an announcement where I'll post this. So this isn't like the only time you're going to see this information. But you got 3 weeks until this February 15th. All right, that's why I want to tell you now to give you like a month ahead of time to think about it. And I know we're still going to be covering some material on organizing, like writing the intro and the conclusion and everything, but you can at least think of your main points for yourself now and think about how do I want to order those main points now, you know? So any questions about the days we're speaking on? I'm going to go into the assignment itself now and talk to you about what to expect. And then we'll talk about next class on Tuesday. So where can you find this assignment? Under module number 5, the personal speech assignment. I'll give you an overview, requirements and format, preparation outline, grading form, speaking order. Don't worry about the speaking order. I will readjust that. So an outline that you can submit here. I have the due date as the 14th because that's the day before anybody's getting any of their speeches. So even if you're going on the 20th, you can submit your outline ahead of time if you want me to look at it and give you feedback. Your outline isn't due until you give the speech. That's when your outline is due. The day you give it, you hand it to me. So requirements, what do you need to have? It's pretty much just a time threshold that we're going for. And there's also examples in the syllabus too that give more information on the layout of how long it's supposed to be. But here's an example of an outline. Pull it up for you. So.
Is this the outline?
Yes.
So I can
Yes. Under module 5, I believe. So here's an example. Here's a title: Yoga, Uniting Mind, Body, and Spirit. The specific purpose: to inform my audience on the 2 dimensions of yoga. The 2 dimensions of yoga are breathing and postures. And then we get an introduction. For 5,000 years, people have been practicing yoga to enhance their mental, physical, and emotional health. We will talk about attention getters on Tuesday and the different types of attention getters for what you need. Yoga comes from the Sanskrit word meaning unite or join. Here's a source they give. Stella Weller in her book, Yoga, Finding Balance and Serenity in Everyday Life, and then the date. So you would say like the date that the book was published. Because if that book was written in the 70s, odds are there's more information, more recent information about yoga. This right here is a credibility statement. I've been practicing yoga for 8 years, and I'm in the process of getting my certification. If somebody comes up here and they're like, yeah, I spent 2 hours learning about yoga, it doesn't really have the same amount of impact as I've been doing this for 8 years. Although there are many dimensions, I'm going to focus on 2: breathing and postures. Along the way, I'm going to share with you some of the health benefits that come with these simple yoga practices. So here's the connective. First, I'm going to talk about breathing. And then we get into it. Breathing has been an essential part of yoga for centuries. There are 4 major stages in the breathing process. And then you see how they break it down into an A, B, C, D. First, inhalation. Second, pause. Exhalation, and another pause. Number 3, demonstration. It goes something like this. And then the speaker gives a demonstration in front of the class to say, when you inhale, you feel it coming from deep within your belly. You'll feel the breath rising up, and you want to feel it around your heart. So they just give more information on the demonstration part of breathing. Why does it concentrate on something so ordinary? When you breathe properly, the amount of oxygen enters your head and bloodstream allows your body to relax, allows you to concentrate better than you normally would. And here's another source. Again, for your personal narrative, you don't need any sources, but this person, the author of The Power of Yoga, writes, correct breathing rejuvenates the entire system by sending increased oxygen into the bloodstream. You can put that whole quote on your note card, and I'm not going to ding you if you want to read that quote verbatim. I don't expect you to memorize it, but for the other things, you wouldn't want to write the whole sentence on your note card. You would just put 3 postures that I find extremely beneficial to me: the tree, the triangle, bow pose, and the king of the dance pose. In your speaking outline, not your written one, you might say 3 postures. And then below that, you'd say tree pose. That's all you would put in 1 period tree pose. And then they give a demonstration of the tree pose. Then they move on to the triangle bow. And then they go to the king of dance. So they also give a connective when they're like, hey, we're done talking about breathing. We're moving on to postures. So today we learned about the 2 important dimensions of yoga: yoga breathing and yoga postures. So you could totally put a connective right here before your conclusion, but it might be a bit redundant if you say, like if you gave an internal summary where you're like, in this speech we talked about, and then you go right into your conclusion and you say redundant. So that's what they say in the conclusion. We talk about 2 different important dimensions, built across the centuries, it's helping millions of people. They give their 3rd source. Each movement demands that we hone some aspect of consciousness, use ourselves in a new way. As yoga is a few simple movements can do a whole lot of good, then they're done. They can say thank you. All right. I know that was a lot to dump on you right now, but I want you to be prepared when you go to give your speech. So you'll notice the difference in how this isn't like a letter. You're not writing a letter because it's broken down very nicely. It's very organized in that regard, so you know what needs to be talked about when in the 4 stages of breathing. So again, you got 3 weeks. I don't want you to panic, but I wanted to make sure that you knew what to expect from the outline. The grading form. This is what it looks like. All you need to know about this is how I grade your speech. Attention getter, did you reveal your topic? Credibility and goodwill. I will talk more about that on Tuesday. All you need to know about goodwill is it's like, how do you connect to your audience somehow? Credibility is, I'm a yoga instructor. That's like a relevant state. Goodwill is like, here's how this can help you in your everyday life. Body preview statement. You're saying, here's what we're talking about in this speech, right there. And this is also under that module, under module number 5. In the body, do you use main points? Do you use connectives? And is it organized? So, the conclusion, all this stuff. Your outline's only 10 points, y'all. So don't worry too much about the outline. The most important part of this is the speech itself. But your outline will definitely guide you with that, which is why I encourage you to give me your outline ahead of time, and I'll look at it and I'll let you know what to fix. 3 to 5. But I will pull up the syllabus just to verify this. Maybe it's right here. Nope. There it is. And yes, 3 to 5 minutes. You don't have to have any sources, but you do need to give me a complete copy of your outline the day you give it. And if you want, you can submit it on Canvas if you want me to give you feedback. You don't have to submit it on Canvas. You just have to give me a physical copy of it when you give your speech. It's just how it works. And make sure it's stapled. I have this staple. I don't know if there's any staples in here. It's not mine. It was just left here. So, any questions about the speech you're going to give in 3 weeks? All right. You can talk about your life history, hobbies, fun facts. There's really no wrong way to talk about yourself. You just have to make sure you have a chronological way that makes, or not chronological, have an organization pattern that makes sense for you and your speech, and make sure you're within the time limit. That's pretty much the only requirements. So.
A bit in our life, we can talk about that.
Yeah. Well, you can talk about like, here's 3 things that happened to me that shaped me as a person. 3 events and what have you. Or you could talk about an event that shaped your life to say, here's the beginning, middle, and end of that event. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? All right. Because I know we still have content to cover, but I wanted you to be aware of what's happening. I didn't want to be like, oh, now you have 2 weeks to work on this. I just want you to get that light switch flickering in your head, thinking about, how do I want to start this? Why delay what you can do today? That's what my mom always said. So we talked about the outline. We talked about my grading standards for this assignment. We know the time limits. No other questions? One more thing is, because it's not in the assignment itself, 10 points deducted for late submissions, and then 1 point for every 10-second block you're over or under time. Just something to be aware of. So I'd highly recommend it when you have it written so you know the cadence. Because I have a tendency to rush when I talk. I talk a little bit too fast, and then I might go under time. So make sure you're pacing yourself. Throw in pauses when you think it has the most effect. Silence is your friend. It's not something to be afraid of, because you can use dramatic pauses for effect. Any questions? All right. We got 45 minutes left. So you're welcome to stay in here, work on whatever you want to work on. Peace out. It's up to you. You're adults. Your time. But thank you for